after that explosive press conference from Antonio Conte. Is he sacked yet, James?
No, not at the moment, but I think it's a matter of time now. Look, this has been coming to a head for a few weeks, probably even longer, really. And I think it's just the final terms of his departure, what kind of payoff he's going to get, and whether he'd even stay in charge beyond the international break, which looks highly unlikely. And look, Spurs find themselves at a crossroads again. What kind of club do they want to be? What kind of manager do they want to have? Are they going to try and work it through to the end of the season with someone like Ryan Mason, as they did last time when they sacked Jose Mourinho? Or are they going to try and make a permanent appointment at what is obviously a very difficult time of the season to do that? But, unfortunately, these issues between Antonio Conte and Tottenham have been bubbling along for months, and it's finally come to a head, as you say, in that explosive press conference after the Southampton game. I think really what Antonio Conte's done is voiced publicly what he's been saying privately for quite some time.
And let's remind you, shall we, just a snippet of what he had to say in that press conference. Remember, Spurs were 3-1 up. In the end, it finished at 3-3. They're used to it here. Don't play for something important. They don't want to play under pressure. They don't want to play under stress. Tottenham's story is this. 20 years, there is the owner, and they never won something. Why? Conte pulling no punches. What was the moment that he broke, that he just thought, I hate it here, James?
Well, I don't know if it's one moment necessarily. I think this was always a marriage of convenience to some extent. Antonio Conte, he comes with his baggage, he comes with his problems, but he is a winner. He wins wherever he goes. He knew he was taking on a big job with Tottenham, and Tottenham knew that they were getting themselves into bed with a very volatile manager who has a very short cycle at clubs. He doesn't tend to last more than 3 seasons. And really what happened was, I think Spurs thought they would be able to get something in that sort of mini cycle, if you like. They thought they'd be able to get over the line. They felt, the club felt, they were not that far away from winning trophies. And Antonio Conte's come in and taken a look at it and said, do you know what, actually, you're a long way away from where you need to be. I want to make a lot of changes to the playing staff. I want to bring in, obviously, my own coaching team. Most managers do that anyway. But I think he wanted a radical overhaul of the playing staff. And he only got a fraction of what he wanted. Now, you can argue that he should have got more out of what he's been given, and I think there's certainly a case for that. But I do think if you took a straw poll of a large section of Tottenham fans and asked them, who is the bigger problem at the moment? Is it Daniel Levy and the ownership of the club, or is it Antonio Conte? It would be much more evenly split than these situations often are, even though Tottenham are probably underperforming, even though the football hasn't been great all season. What he's saying and what he said in that press conference does stand to reason. There have been long-standing issues, primarily, and the most important one is that the club have never quite invested enough to get them over the line to win the major prizes. You can go back to Harry Redknapp in 2012, that 2011-12 January window, when he wanted 2 big players and he got given 2 players on a free, Louis Saha and Ryan Nelson, I think it was, when he wanted Gary Cahill and Carlos Tevez. They didn't want to go that extra mile. They thought, well, we're just about top of the league. We're very close to it at this point in the window. At this point mid-season, maybe we can do it with the squad that we've got. And then you look at Mauricio Pochettino a few years ago, when they got to the Champions League final, even before that game, he was saying this club needs to think big. They need to think about taking it to the next level in terms of the wage bill, in terms of the size of the squad, the quality of the squad. And once again, Daniel Levy and the ownership didn't listen and they missed their opportunity. And I think what Antonio Conte is doing now is echoing those frustrations of the past.
Conte's going to go off into the sunset. He'll get another big job considering everything he's achieved before Spurs. What now for Spurs?
Don't know. I mean, it's not that long ago they hired Nuno Espirito Santo.
Yeah.
That's the kind of decision-making that's going around at Tottenham. Look, I can't really say much more than what James has said because it's correct. There are both parties to blame here. But the one thing I would say is I think Antonio Conte must be slightly foolish to think that Spurs were all of a sudden going to dig up what has been their mantra for, as he said, the best part of 20 years and go down a different line for him. That's the way, whether we like it or not, and the Spurs fans certainly don't like it, that's the way they're running their business. So there is an argument that, yeah, they should be playing better, yeah, the football should be more attractive, and yeah, they should have been getting better results. I mean, Southampton bottom of the league, AC Milan, not the strongest team by a long stretch in Serie A. Very meek performance at home in the second leg when they were 1-0 down.
So this is where Spurs are. He's right. This is where they've been for 20 years, and that's where they're going to be in the future.
No, yeah, absolutely, he's right. And I think the surprising thing to that is that Antonio Conte didn't have these discussions beforehand.
Maybe he has made promises beforehand.
And that's what I'm kind of thinking here. I think it's a little late to act surprised that Spurs aren't backing you in the way that you had hoped, or maybe other clubs had done in the past, because they've never done that. So unless you have those conversations coming in, you can't complain about it going out the door. At the same time, and as James points out, yeah, you can split the responsibility straight down the middle here. Daniel Levy hasn't been easy to deal with in the transfer market. They've kept players when they could have moved them on and used that money, and I'm thinking Harry Kane here, could have used that to really build a squad and for the future going forward. Other players have just kind of... 12 months ago, we were talking about Heung-min Son as being the leading scorer in the Premier League. Hugo Lloris is a keeper I absolutely love, but he should have been replaced 3 or 4 years ago. There are problems there that were evident for everyone to see that weren't addressed. So the act of surprise now, I find a little surprising. Again, unless those conversations happened, promises were made, and Daniel Levy and the ownership group went back on those promises.
I think what's happened here is Spurs have thought that their deficiencies that James touched on in terms of the squad, I think as a certainly not, by the way, it's the most invisible ownership in the Premier League. I think as a chief executive, Daniel Levy has figured that Antonio Conte, with his skill, with his CV, with his management style of this defensive, hard to beat, he's going to get just enough out of this squad that that's going to propel them to maybe being on the coattails.
Well, he said, didn't he, top four was a miracle last year.
So, but I think Spurs have looked at it and went, maybe we don't have to spend this amount of millions on all these players. Maybe we spend it on the salary of a manager who might be able to get this current squad with a few additions. Maybe he'll be the difference. But quite clearly, that's not happening.
To that point, James, obviously... Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to maybe give an example about the recruitment, which I think is quite illustrative of the fact that there are still competing voices at the top of the club about who they go after and squad building. So they signed Jed Spence last summer, really promising right back, had his choice of a number of clubs, had spent the second half of last season on loan at Nottingham Forest, tore it up in the Championship, looked really good in the FA Cup. They spent £19 million on him. He plays, I think he played 2 or 3 games, and he's shipped out on loan in January. And suddenly Spurs go and spend 39 million, I think it is, on Pedro Porro. They signed him initially on loan with an obligation to buy 39 million in the same position. Now, Jed Spence has not become a bad player in 6 months. He has had no opportunity to show what he can do. Certainly in the Premier League, he's had the odd minute, literally the odd couple of minutes here, the odd couple of minutes there. He's then sent out on loan. Pedro Porro comes in right at the end of the window to play in the same position. All the while, he's trying to juggle Emerson Royale, who everybody in football really knows was freely available last summer. They didn't sell him at the last minute. A decision was taken there. And then look at what happened with Matt Doherty. Matt Doherty plays a lot of the games, and then suddenly his contract is ripped up and he's sent off to Atletico Madrid. That position, just that one position alone, it just shows you that the fuzzy thinking and the confused recruitment strategy at the top of the club. And Tottenham are not a club that can afford to make those mistakes. They're not a Chelsea. They're not a Manchester United. They don't generate the revenue where they can write off 20 million here or 30 million there and just burn through players in sort of 6 months or 12-month cycles. They have to get those decisions right. And the fact of the matter is that from almost day one, Antonio Conte was describing Jed Spence as a club signing. Not his signing, very, very pointed words, a club signing. And that was pretty clearly saying, this guy's nothing to do with me. So he plays a couple of times, and now he's out on loan at Rennes in France. That cannot continue to happen. Spurs either have to back, it looks like it's all over now anyway, but whoever they get in as a manager, and this was certainly the case with Conte, they either get a manager in and they back him, they build the squad he wants, Or they do it themselves and they find a manager who will fit their own recruitment strategy. What they've done is fudge it. They've gone a couple of the steps down the road with Antonio Conte, looked okay, but not giving him everything he wants. He's then blown up, as he always does, because it happens everywhere he goes, into Milan, Chelsea, Juventus, you name it, he falls out with the board over not getting enough. But Spurs knew they were getting that, but almost as if they were wary of it happening, they've never quite taken every step down one path or the other, and they've got caught, and that's left them where they are now.
So, James, when it comes to the next manager, Ryan Mason, that's going to be an interim between now and the end of the season, try and get Spurs in the top 4. From there, then they bring in their permanent man. But who do they want?
Well, look, I mean, I've heard that Thomas Tuchel is a possibility. Mauricio Pochettino, a lot of the fans would like to see that. You have to wonder. I did interview Daniel Levy a few years ago, and he told me then that he would be open to Pochettino returning one day. Take that at face value with a massive pinch of salt. It's Daniel Levy. I just don't think enough has changed at the club to really warrant going back to Pochettino. All the frustrations he had in 2019 largely will still be there. On the flip side, he might be the one manager who could convince Harry Kane to stay and maybe sign a new contract if the Manchester United interest materialises. Looks that, if they really went for him, I think they could get him this summer. But look, I don't think that you only need to look at the mess they went through in appointing Antonio Conte. They ended up with Nuno Espirito Santo when they went through so many other managers. He was about the 5th or 6th choice for that job. You think about Gennaro Gattuso, they were very close to appointing him. There was a fan backlash. They decided to go somewhere else. There were so many other managers in that cycle then that I don't think they know who they want. I think Thomas Tuchel, I remember he did a press conference when he was Chelsea manager talking about how he was a Tottenham fan growing up. He loved the Premier League. I think he would take that job if he was offered it. I suppose you could think about other things like Conte's 3-4-3 system. To some extent, they've built a squad around that. Tuchel liked to play with 3 at the back primarily, so there's a kind of a logical fit there. He's good with the media. I could see Thomas Tuchel maybe working for them. He's a big enough name that, with Champions League pedigree, that Spurs would feel like they're getting a top manager. But any manager walking into that club now has got to ask themselves the question: well, if they're not going to back Antonio Conte, are they going to back me?
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.